All right. We ready?
I'm ready, yes.
Okay. So can we call the Policy and Governance Subcommittee meeting to order? And I would ask the recording secretary to take attendance.
Ms. Starry?
Here.
Ms. Del Rossi?
Present.
Chief Present?
And I'd also note that Ms. Martin and Mr. Lay are with us, as well as from the administration, Mr. Hall, Mr. Skinner, and Ms. Phillips. I guess we're going to talk about the interventions and enhancements report that we received from Mr. Skinner back in the spring, right? Yeah, in May. Would you like to give us an overview of what we're talking about? There's an extra Johnny Brothers right there.
I should caution you about giving me open mic. Not be it's in a more serious. I could say a lot, right? So, but please redirect me and focus me to what you'd like answered, because I love, believe it or not, I love this sort of forum. I love talking about schoolwork right in those schools, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity.
Well, actually, since you say that, I think we've all had the report for several months. You might want to refresh yourself on it. But for me, the compelling issue was what types of intervention programs are being offered in the schools, instruction in particular, because we had many students as part of the civics projects telling me they're doing computer-based work. So these are students that are struggling. They're not keeping up in their classes, and they're being assigned a computer, and they were losing allied arts to do it. That's what initially brought it to my attention, and then I'm providing you the focus. The other part that came out of your report was that not every school is offering algebra as an enrichment or enhancement for our strong math students, which I know back in the Dr. Bear days, we had great success with kids, our high-flying math students, be able to come to the high school because of the preparation they were getting in middle school and walk right into those high-level math classes and do well. Now, we are the committee that just increased our graduation requirements, as you are aware, especially in the math area. So this brings a double concern for me that the middle schools are doing what they can to really, provide the supports for the kids that are struggling, but also the challenge and supports for the kids that are excelling at math. So those are the concerns I had, and that's just me. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to give further direction to Mr. Skinner before he starts to talk about what he has learned about interventions and enrichments at the middle school. Anyone else?
Well, if I could add, I think Ms. Martin made a comment on the night. I did not go back and watch the tape, but I recall some aspects of it, and I recall that there was consternation about the idea that students might miss allied arts classes for catch-up work and so on. So can we maybe start there? But in terms of giving me focus, Ms. Doherty, if there's a very broad scope again, and there's the interventions, and there's algebra, and each and every one of those could be a significant concern. So the concern that I heard on the night, the most direct concern, was about students missing allied arts to get their interventions. So first and foremost, that's no longer happening. It was only happening at one school, the Daily, and they've rejigged the schedule this year, so that's no longer the case. And so if that was the only topic tonight, and you all said, so that's great, we got it problem solved, let's all go home, I would say, please stay so we can talk about it some more, because I think it's a deeper problem than that. And so if it's for the context, I think that's helpful for us is this. So in a middle school, as most of the schools we're talking about are middle schools, there are 6 hours and 50 minutes in a day. That's a fixed, constant, fixed, right? And so to honor your comments about many programs I've heard in the past year alone, You happened to reference Civics Day, Ms. Doherty. There was a Civics Day. Many of you attended. It was very well received. We applauded people on the floor of the committee meeting that night, and lots of people made comments about how wonderful it was to see students being so engaged in their social studies and their civics work. Let's do more of that. We had a science fair. Again, some of you attended. We all talked about it at the meeting. We applauded it. Terrific to see what our youngsters can do in science and actually present wonderful experiments. Great stuff. Let's do more of that. I could go on, right? So if I could have a conversation with you tonight about, like, do you realize how lacking students these days are in financial literacy? We have got to get after that. More financial literacy. Social emotional needs, mental health. We now have programs, currently have programs in our schools to teach social emotional competencies. Students who go through that learn social skills, enabling them to make friends, enabling them to be parts of groups and so on, in ways that they may not have picked up like we might have when we were young. Times are different and so on. Those competencies are really valuable to kids. Let's do more of that. And where I'm going with it, you might guess, right? The 6 hours and 50 minutes. And so the point is that you've got to make choices. So when the band instructor at my school would say, well, let's do this or let's do that, and I thought, oh, this is a really great idea. And then I would say to him, where do you think we should take the time from? Right? So each time we applaud the Civics Day or the science, and let's do more of that, I want to shout to you, where do you think we should take the time from? And so back to the topic of tonight, that there are youngsters in our schools, for all sorts of reasons, who are not able to access grade-level curriculum. The kid is really willing to work, put them in a science class or social studies class or whatever, and give them the text. But if they're not able to comprehend that text, it's really, really difficult to see them succeed. So this is leading to the need for reading intervention. And there's research that says that there's a cutoff. It's not, there's a nice, neat cutoff, but it probably isn't that way in real life. But the research says if a child is 2 or more years behind in reading level, they won't be able to access the curriculum in class. And we can test for that. So in my school, we tested for that. And if a child is in 7th grade and their reading level is 5th grade or below, we said that kid needs a reading intervention. If the child's in 8th grade and their reading level is 6th grade or below, that kid needs a reading intervention. They need additional help. There's a variation on this for math. The kid needs math intervention. It's not as simple. So, where should we find the time to do that? There's a lot of variables here. You don't even have to find time. You got to find a really terrific expert reading teacher. If you got a kid in middle school that can't read well, it's not good enough to give them enough time. It's not good enough to put them in front of a computer. And so some of us have had over time, sometimes you might find like a retired specialist comes back in as a tutor. We had such a person, phenomenal work. The kids always made great progress. There were lots and lots of times when that didn't happen. But about where to find the time, it's true that at the daily school, some of those students missed some, not all, but some allied arts time to receive those services. And that met with objection from the committee members, understandably. But the question is, where else should it come from? So one popular solution that I've seen no objection to is these win blocks. So a lot of schools have a win block. You create a block in the day where it's not ELA or math or allied arts or anything else. It's a what I need block. And during that block, the students get their reading intervention. If they don't need a reading intervention, they could go to a reading club or, a study skills center or whatever. Sounds great. And everybody's happy with it, and they shouldn't be. Where does the time come from to run your win block? Do you know Wind blocks, let's say the block is about a 50-minute block. Sometimes it's an hour, but let's say it's 50 minutes. You could probably guess the 50 minutes that they found to run the wind block, 10 minutes out of ELA, 10 minutes out of math, 10 minutes out of social studies, 10 minutes out of science, 10 minutes out of applied arts. 10 minutes out of every single subject for every single student every single day. That's 30 hours of instruction in every core subject, every day, every child. And I want to be respectful, but I want to say, tell me that it's not better to choose the kids that most need the help, a select group, and create a better solution that doesn't affect the whole school. But yes, it means the kid missed half of art class. And what we did with those students that missed half of art class, we ran a special art period that was shorter for those students. So this is the first conundrum. I can keep you here all night. The first conundrum is where do you find a time for it? And you have to find a time within the 6 hours and 50 minutes. After school is not an option. That came up in the committee meeting. After school for interventions is not an option. Students might not be there. Busing isn't provided. The kids can't be picked up. They just don't show. All the kids will show for your after-school program that are the exact kids you don't need to be there, right? And research and literature shows, I can point you to it if you'd like, it must be during school time. You have to get after kids' time. And so there's a cry and a lament. How can we possibly have our kids in Lowell going through middle school missing music? We're not going to put up with that. This committee wants to have our students experience music. I very much respect that. I really do. I advocate for the applied arts as well. But in place of that lament, we now send kids maybe to high school who don't read as well as they should. Is that better?
I would push back on that. If you're struggling with reading, your wind block is giving you that training for reading.
Correct.
So the 10 minutes that you missed out of your allied arts class is being compensated by the wind block.
That's right.
And I would also say that it wasn't just about missing art, that those students who were already at risk of disengaging, being our freshman dropouts, because they were falling behind, felt they were being punished. Maybe they excelled at art, or music was something that got them excited. Because they struggled with reading, they didn't get to go to music, they didn't get to go to art. It's not a way to engage them.
Right.
I think it was doing the opposite.
Right. I'm not going to come before you and tell you, let's keep talking because I have all the solutions to everything. I just don't, right? There's still the 6 hours and 50 minutes no matter what I said, too, right? I don't know how to fit it all in either, but I think it comes down to, like, choices. And I'm saying the choice of the wind block that is a nice solution for a lot of people that works very neatly is, yes, you're correct. It's providing the intervention for the kid who needs it without the child missing allied arts. And so we don't complain. But if you look at it closely, every single child in that school is missing 30 hours of core instruction over a whole year.
But if the wind, and I'm sorry, I don't want to go on a back, but the point with, I think if, I've always looked at it, every child is unique, right? And our goal in a perfect world, which we're not, right? We are locked into 6 hours and 50 minutes. Our goal, a good education, takes a child where they are and brings them up, right? Providing supports, feeding off their interests, what gets them excited, and that should be the goal, to treat each child where they are and bring them up. If the wind block enables on one side algebra for that fast, accelerated math student, reading intervention for the child that's struggling with reading, I think it's worth what you sacrifice.
Believe it or not, I've actually deliberately been focused in some ways, so I'm focusing on the time aspect, but there are other issues with wind block because then it's like, who's teaching those classes? Is it really enrichment for the kids who are in algebra? Are you really providing expert reading instruction to the children who need the reading intervention? And if they are, that's wonderful. But are all the other kids, hopefully, it's not, hopefully the majority of children don't need the intervention, are all those other children really receiving something valuable? And I'm not talking about any specific school. I didn't examine this, but I've known cases in the past where if you're ELA and social studies and math and so on, all these teachers, most times, or in many cases, what happens during the wind block is those teachers get their prep. Because the whole other series of conditions that we have to meet, teachers are required to have prep time. Teachers must have lunches. Students have to have lunches. Students have to have recess. And you get any number of, right? And it's like the most experienced and best person I've ever known about scheduling once told me, you're making me put all the jigsaw pieces together to make the picture, but you're having me use the jigsaw puzzle pieces from two different puzzles, right? And then there's pieces missing. But it's impossible. It really is. And it comes down to choices. But to your point, Ms. Doherty, it's, if it played out the way we can portray it and the way it looks on paper with the wind block, you might well say, Mr. Skinner, you talked about those 10 minutes missing and all the times missing from core subjects, but I'm going to be okay with that because the time in the wind block will be so valuable to overcompensate for that. That would be worthwhile. But it's not as simple as that. It really isn't. Who are the people that are doing it? I've known phys ed teachers or other people to be drafted in, and so being authentic about it, it's just not a simple answer.
Ms. Martin and then Joe Rossi.
Thank you very much. I understand that we're asking you to solve an unsolvable problem, so there's that. And I really do get the challenge of it. I think that, the schedules are such that we really, anything you take from one side is, you lose on the other side. There's no way to balance this out. My thought is, and I know you're coming from personal experience at the Daily, and I think that there was, I think there were systems that worked at the Daily that weren't necessarily deployed, across the district. My thought is that if we recognize we are never going to have a perfect solution, which I think we have to recognize, to my mind, if we're using the Allied Arts block to do the interventions, we need to be extremely aware that it's not 100% of a loss. Like if a student needs interventions and it's, one school block every day, I mean, isn't there a way that we can balance that off with, whether it's 3 days in an intervention, 2 days still having that traditional Allied Arts, just so. Because I think to, Ms. Doherty's point too, I mean, a student who is coming to school and the one thing that is engaging them is their arts programming or social, whatever it is. Any one of those Allied Arts topics is strengthening and reinforcing ELA and mathematics. If you're doing it right, it's reinforcing all those different things. So I don't think we necessarily have to look at it as an either or. I think the real strength comes from including both.
I agree. If I could just support what you're saying, but I know students who go to school who wouldn't go to school if it wasn't for art class or music class. They go for that reason. But it's a fallacy to suggest. By the way, we also did exactly what you're talking about. We didn't remove a child entirely from Allied Arts, right? But the fallacy is saying, I don't think this has to be an either or. We can have both. That's 6 hours and 50 minutes in a day. You can't. You have to make choices. And the way to make choices, I would say, for the school principal and for the committee is to set out your priorities. And say, here's what we prioritize. One of your priorities could be that every single child gets every single minute of Allied Arts classes, no matter what, and we're going to prioritize that. And I respect that if that's what your decision is. But the only point I'm really making is that we have to prioritize. And in the case of that one school we were talking to, which I'm very familiar with, one of the priorities was we were desperately trying to make sure students got caught up in reading and math before they went to high school. In more research shows that by the time they get to middle school, it's actually quite unlikely, no matter what you do, no matter what expertise, it's quite unlikely you will get them caught up. if it's not caught early, right? Yeah.
That the instruction was not great. They were sitting in front of computers.
I'm talking in general. There's research on national programs. In general, if students are not caught by middle school and caught up in reading by middle school, you can't give up on it. So you have to double down and work even harder on it, which is what we were after when we did this. But it's actually still unlikely. The students just generally don't catch up as well. What you're saying, sorry, no arguments. You know, you could have the best sort of schedule and setup for doing it, and you have if the program is lousy, then yeah, that's no good either.
I mean, I think part of it is we have to do it earlier. We have to catch them in
Agreed.
elementary.
Absolutely.
But the issue before us about the middle school was that they were losing allied arts and they were sitting in front of computers. It wasn't providing value for at least the students who complained to me about it.
Yeah, but be really cautious. But we should not dismiss the students' concerns, right? They're our customers, right? They're the we should be listening to that. But we also should be cautious when a student says something to you. I've had many students tell me that recess time should be twice as long as it is, right? And it's not that I didn't agree with the kid, right? You know, and I don't think we should ever have homework, right? But of course you might have a child complaining about it, and I think that's absolutely worth investigating. But I wouldn't automatically assume that the computerized instruction was not helpful to the kid. I don't want to get into great details, but computerized instruction can be like really, really valuable because there are programs now where you begin to do the lesson, and there's a term for it that won't come to mind right now, but it's sort of the program auto-corrects as you go to provide this child with exactly the instruction they need and that child with the instructions they need. And there are flags on these programs as the teacher circulates that flag the teacher, come on and help this boy because he's struggling with his verbs, and this child stopped working a few minutes ago, and it sends a signal and so on. I'm not saying it's great, but it might be a whole. The point is, like, what are the outcomes after you've used this? Does it really work for kids or not? And are kids sick and tired of it or not? And so obviously some kids might be, and we should look at that. But don't make a broad assumption, I would say.
Ms. Del Rossi has been very patient.
Thank you. Mr. Skinner, I just want to say I think the only time that you didn't mention in the 6 hours and 50 minutes is the transition time and lining the students up, which would take out a whole other amount of time in itself. But all of our students are very socially, emotionally delayed today, especially with missing a chunk of time with COVID. They don't understand a great deal. They don't even understand, how to even turn on a computer for the most part today. So there's a lot going on with our students today that they even need pure guidance with. And so I took a ton of notes and now I can't even read them. And there are unaligned programs throughout our districts, and it sounds like the Daily had a pretty strong program with the WIN program, and that's new since I was even teaching in, I think, Lowell Public Schools and in the middle school program, which I think it's important to have a What I Need program and to catch up in those programs and to know that it's structured for all those subjects. I think that's important for students to catch up with. But the reality is who's going to teach them all of those subjects too, you know what I mean? And I think, we need to be careful with teaching our young students who may not be able to even read when they get. And that's my concern. When I was teaching at the middle school level, I came across many students who were not able to read when I was teaching at the STEM Academy, and it was very hard. I tried to play catch up with them, and they were at that stage where were they not ever going to be able to read, or, I had to go back to the very pure basics with them. But now you throw in, now we're going to teach these very at-risk kids all about sex education now. Right? And that's going to be the one thing that they're going to cling to now, right? Sex education, they're going to see all the imagery now. So I think we need to be also very, very selective in like who we're teaching this to and determining who's at risk in their reading levels and what they're seeing too, because there is a importance of really kind of understanding of what their comprehension, actual comprehension, and what their imagery is, right? So if we're showing them these visuals, right, and they're not understanding, we could be putting these kids into trouble. You know, and I'm just saying this as I'm listening, and I'm thinking of the very at-risk students that I had, and maybe they would do this and thinking this was a way to go on with life and to like maybe to have a child and to like, you know, the right way to go on and to go on with their life and to have a boyfriend and, you know, and not make the greatest decision and not complete their education instead of making a right decision in education at the same time. So I think we need to be careful in teaching, because even though we're trying to make the right choices, I think we need to also do a risk assessment of who we're teaching it to and assuring we're teaching it in the right ways and assuring that their comprehension level is at the point that they're ready to understand what we're teaching them, because students in middle school today sometimes aren't always ready to learn what we should be teaching them at the middle school level, and especially since experiencing COVID, I think. And I was just thinking all of that as we were really talking right now too, and just taking my experience of what I experienced in teaching middle school and what I heard and from listening to everybody talking, and I just wanted to share that. So, thank you.
Thank you. If nothing else, it adds to the notion of the complexity of the work. So, Story.
I'm just thinking about something you have in your report here, the suitable application of school autonomy. Because I think the reason I asked this to come to the policy subcommittee was because I was thinking at the time that we needed a policy that said we wouldn't do interventions during allied arts, that there would be some guardrails, to use the word we were using earlier tonight, about the interventions. But I'm getting the sense from you that you don't think the wind blocks, like you don't want a policy that says we're not going to take allied arts from students who need extra help. I guess what is the solution for saying we know we want to provide interventions, we know we want to provide enhancement for students that are ready to fly higher, especially when the requirements are going up in terms of what the world expects you to know, what the high school is going to expect you to be able to succeed at in order to graduate. What are the guardrails that we should be looking at?
I'd advise you not to give me the leverage to set that policy for you, right? I mean, I'd be happy to outline for you what the priorities should be and what we should set as policy or not. But I think I'm trying to be cautious not to do that. But if you ask my opinion, I'll give it to you. I think that the solution involves, to some extent, setting priorities. For me, the priority was and is still, and I would urge you to have kids be able to read and think critically and be numerate, and that's a major focus that we should have. I did not include in there the allied arts. It's not because I don't value them. I'm saying that kids' reading and numeracy should be the number one priority. And I'm saying that because you have 66 hours and 50 minutes, and you can't do it all. It doesn't say don't do allied arts or don't do financial literacy, for example, or don't do social emotional competencies, but set a priority. And I would be careful around policy setting that sort of crimps that. We already have a policy around how much time students should have for art. We already have for lunch for lunch. We have a policy that says how much recess time students should have. We have contractual obligations that say teachers need so much time off during the day for prep time. It's not time off, but it's for prep time. We have contractual obligations for various other aspects. And then we have laws and mandates that say what special education students' plans demand you must provide. And English language learners, guidelines and policy around what they must be. We're talk about that jigsaw puzzle thing, right? It's really, really difficult. And the more we layer onto that additional policies, you can't do this and you must do that, it just further limits. And so I think that word autonomy is important because it should be responsible and it should be suitable. But the other feature of that is that different schools do not have the same conditions. If you can do a lot flexibly. At one point, my school had 8 strands at each grade level. And for reasons we didn't get into, the even number was wonderful, and the number of strands gave you a lot of flexibility to some really creative programming and wonderful things. I couldn't do as much when we went down to 6 strands when the Stocklosa school was opened. The Butler school has 5 strands. That's a nightmare, right? In terms of scheduling, because it's an odd number, right? So the autonomy has to do with you've got to allow the school and its community to decide how best to manage with the conditions that prevail in their school.
Can I just say, and I absolutely agree. I agree that part of our school autonomy is that leadership within each one of our school buildings needs to have the opportunity to make the most of what they've got, whether that's superior teachers in one area or not, or a flexible schedule based on just the number of students that are in the classroom and whatnot, all those things. What I'd love us to be able to do is, we're a big district. I would love for our middle schools to be able to tell the committee, that's the least of their troubles, tell the community what innovations they've come up with. You've heard this for 20 years. The Daly's doing this. Why isn't everyone else doing what the Daly's doing? And the reality is that the Daly was a different entity. But there were some innovations that you and your team created and made the most of that could have found purchase in other middle schools. And it just seems to me, I've always said, the idea is that we've got great people doing great work in tiny little corners and no one knows about it. So that if there's a solution that's come up in one school, what's the mechanism that allows the Daly and the Butler and all these middle schools, and we're just talking middle schools right now, to be able to really promote, this is how we solve our intervention problem. And maybe at one school it's maybe a wind thing that works for them, a wind block that works for them. Maybe at another school it's the way they balance their allied arts and interventions in a way that made sure everyone got something, and wasn't totally relegated. At the end of the day, I completely agree. Our students need to read. Our students need to understand math. These are 2 key things. We want to set priorities. I absolutely agree. But I just, it just seems like there are people coming up with solutions all the time, and we never hear about them.
So I think it's a really great point. And I think that there's hope. And one of the hopes is that principals are collaborating with each other. And in this, I can give you an example this year of a new type of collaboration. I think is right along the lines of what you're saying. So we're working. We have some new data dashboards this year, and principals are working on how to leverage the data that they've got to inform their school and then decide on what priority areas to make improvements in. And schools are made some progress along those lines already. And so we've networked, we've grouped schools together who have similar, what we refer to as problems of practice. They've decided what their priorities they need to work on. And many schools have similar problems of practice. And so when we have professional development for school leaders, we do that at least once a month, we've grouped them in networks so they can cross-pollinate and support each other with doing that. So that's just one example, but so it's one way to get it. We say, you still might not hear about that, right? But if it's happening, I think it's important that it's happening, and I think the way to get it to happen is to have more collaboration across schools.
I agree. And again, I say us not hearing about it, not the biggest deal in the world. But, you know, other principals hearing about it, that's important.
Yes, we're working on that.
Thank you.
I just want to go back to the original impetus for this, which was finding that we didn't have algebra being, enhancement being offered at every middle school. We had, I guess it was only one school that was losing allied arts, and you're telling me they're not doing that now?
Correct.
So what are they doing for the interventions if they're not doing it during allied arts?
Well, they've so there's two parts of the algebra and the right. So as far as I don't have their schedule with me, but they've manipulated a schedule to provide intervention to students at a different time from allied arts. I'm smiling at my own question in my mind here. Is that if you'd have told me, I'd say,
when?
what did they take away? Right? What did they take away? So I know they shortened homeroom time. That was part of it. They had to shorten something else. I can't recall at this moment what, but they create in order to meet the to respond to the concerns of the committee. They chose to change their schedule in such a way that they could meet the need without removing allied arts. If the algebra is a different topic entirely, and again, I think it's worth. It would be worth assessing first off if that's what you really want to do. So when there was a time when all we heard in education was algebra for all at middle school, algebra for all. That's no longer a theme, and it's part.
But didn't we just add another math requirement to the graduation?
Yes, but so
I mean, I think we all want the same things. We want, reading competency, numerical competency, kids that are well-adjusted, know how to make friends. We all want those things, and we only have 6 hours and 50 minutes.
we do. But about the math competency, so I'm a math major, and I love to talk about math competency, right? But math is one of these subjects that there's sort of classical ideas about how it should be approached, and one of them is, at least in the United States, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, Trigonometry, Calculus, this sort of sequence, right? And that's not how it's done everywhere. And in my education in Ireland, we never had that distinction between those different. All of that stuff is math. And so you had courses in math that involved, there's a lot of algebra that's intertwined with geometry and vice versa, and with trigonometry and so on. So we never had those topics divvied out. And there's been debate over years about what high school math curriculum should look like. In other words, who are we preparing and for what? Like, I don't want to feed into this because I love the math involved, but like what algebra does for students in their lives and in their careers and in their college success, right? Several years ago, there was not a requirement, for instance, for statistics in high school. I don't believe there still is, right? But statistical knowledge and manipulation is far more useful to everyone than the algebra or trigonometry will ever be for everyone that gets pushed through it, right? So I'm not denying this thing. We should look at what are those enrichment programs we're advancing in middle schools, but I think promoting algebra alone is probably a little sort of an older-fashioned idea, and part of the reason why it faded was that the texts and the programs that we use in middle school involve the algebra through the regular programming, and it's not sort of done at the side.
Maybe what I'm really talking about instead of algebra is looking at aligning the middle school math to what the high school is going to expect with our increased requirements. And if kids that are ready to do more have the opportunity to do more. Ms. Del Rossi?
And let's just bring it all home. Let's just talk about the anxiety that algebra and math altogether brings girls especially, and let's put a course together on that, because that's an overwhelming thing for girls to deal with all together. And let's teach girls to approach math in a way that it's easier for them, because that's all together. There's tons of research on that.
The girls are outperforming the boys today in math. In middle schools and in high school, the girls are outperforming the boys.
But there is tons of research on how math causes females tons of anxiety when it comes to even originating, like starting any type of problem. And it causes, right? You know more than I do, I'm sure, but even promoting those types of courses to help educate our students that it's normal.
Thank you. Yeah.
So are we basically saying we're not making any policy changes? That would be the recommendation of the policy subcommittee. Are you comfortable with that, Mr. El Rossi? We're not asking for policy changes at this point. We don't want to constrict the autonomy of the schools any more than we already are, but, I mean, at least for the record, we are in agreement we don't want to take away from allied arts.
Sure.
I mean,
And
but we're not
that's
going to make it a policy? I guess I don't, okay.
It happens that it's not occurring, right? And it didn't ever occur.
It was occurring,
But,
though.
no, but it occurred in one school to the objection of a few students. But it's, anyway, it's not occurring anymore. And my strong recommendation is that you don't set any policy around it. Everything else we talked about is valid. I think Ms. Del Rossi's comments about anxiety, social emotional needs of students is absolutely critical right now. Everything else we talked about is civics, financial literacy, algebra. What are we doing with that anyway? Shouldn't the intervention programs be, or the enrichment programs be stronger and so on? All of that I'm happy to take on and will. But I think there's not, my strong recommendation is that there's not a place in the conversation tonight for policy changes.
And I think it's also worth noting, we all recognize we have a huge amount of holes or gaps in our student learning because of COVID. A year out of school, a year trying to do remote, losing contact with your peers. We already were becoming a very electronic kind of, I mean, the kids growing up now, even my own kids, they don't pick up the phone if I call, but if I text, they respond. It's like less human interaction, and we're supposed to be figuring out how to provide the supports. We've got tons of money coming in from the federal government to help us do that. How are we going to make up for the learning loss? How are we going to make up for the social, emotional, the anxiety? More people depressed, more people anxious than we've ever seen at all ages, right? And so that's why I think it was important to get okay, what are we doing for intervention enhancements? And I think we should maybe plan to revisit what are we doing around it, and to have the schools be on notice that we care about this. We need to know where the money and the supports are going to help our kids who have lost ground in these areas. And I know you only have 6 hours and 50 minutes to do it. So I guess I would entertain a motion, Mr. El Rossi, is just a report of progress, no policy changes. Are you up for that?
Yeah, I guess, and if you could look into, I mean, I don't know if it's possible to even look into where you're from. I'm sure it's Ireland. But there's no type of lineage of where you need to start in math or how to take it. I think that's so important for us maybe to, I don't know if in Massachusetts if that's possible, but I think the requirement, if there's any way to get out of that for us in any way, shape, or form, to take that pressure off of our kids, because that's probably a number one cause of dropouts, or kids feeling like they're the failures. And, and it's just, that's the last thing our kids need to fail. And algebra's hard. I mean, I must have taken it about 25 times. Not going to lie, not my strong suit. But I did it. I mean, luckily I was able to get through it somehow. And then I had to take it in college again. But, I mean, and I think it's just a lesson in getting through the hard stuff, right? But at the same time, today, I think our kids have gone through enough with COVID especially. And I think if we can take anything off what our kids have already been through, I think we need to as much as possible. So, yes, a report of progress.
Thank you.
And
And Mr.
adjourn.
Lay had his hand up.
Thank you. For just listening, I learned a lot today. Mr. Skinner, I want to thank you for saying all these good things that, that what we need, reading, writing, math, and think critically. I think those are important things. I don't want to state the obvious. I mean, you all think like that too, I would assume. But one thing that I learned today is that, we all say we want this, we want that. Throw at the teachers. They have only 6.25 hours to work each day, and so what do we want to throw out? In order to fit all of that? So I think just like basketball. Before you need to dunk and shoot 3 points, you need to dribble and you need to be able to do layups. Those are the basic things, and those are the basic things that the student needs. So if you can do extra singing or music or whatever that you have talent with, that's great. That's just like shooting 3 points and be able to dunk. But first of all, the most important thing is everybody needs to be able. Everybody on the team should be able to read, write, and doing simple math. So if there are any positions that we need to increase on to help the students, would be those positions that help the students need those basic things. So I'm thinking. If we keep on let the student pass in the early grades, socially passing them without them completing their basic math or reading or writing, then we will face that problem in later grades. So I would think that we have to tighten up in the early grades if we should let them go to summer school. If they're on the borderline, they need a couple extra help, send them to summer school just to let them catch up. That would be probably a good idea. So I think we just need to catch them early when we can. And that might be easier to train them too. That's my comment. So thank you.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Rossi, seconded by me. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you for coming out tonight.